Soulless Dead, Brotherhood, Chapter 11. Questions. After getting this news, this statement about this crazy guy running around, we weren't even sure if we wanted to stay. I could tell my parents were really nervous, especially Mother, as she cradled me in her arms like I was some sort of baby or infant. Of course, I wrenched myself away from her mother-like death grip and assured her we were fine. There were armed guards posted out in the front. They were definitely on red alert as everybody was running in and out of the doors, asking where these certain people were. There were concerned parents and even what appeared to be soldiers or Minutemen, whatever you want to call it, coming in asking what the heck is going on. There were couriers running out with little letters, sending out to the walls, I assume, or to wherever they were going for defense. Apparently the crazy nut job stole a plane, or at least held a pilot at gunpoint. I've heard a couple different stories within the last few hours. We all sat in that foyer, waiting for our judgment. It felt like we were animals being judged at a dog show. The only difference was we'd either be thrown into the meat grinder or spared. We waited for quite some time. My dad was concerned as our group started to split off into little sections, 3s and 4s, and people here and there. We stayed in the foyer as we were pretty much held at gunpoint, but they were all whispering to each other. Some were saying, "Should we stay here? I mean, they've got a nut job running around." I even heard Sergeant Calloway talking to Trevor. He was going, "I don't know if this was the right idea, being led to this place. I mean, they're right in the middle of a freaking battle, for God's sakes. Do you think we really need that with the dead walking around, disease, and even those crazy marauders? I mean, we just barely got out of El Dorado, let alone dealing with everything else." He was fairly vocal about it, and he made sure my dad heard it. My dad looked over at us, and then looked over at them. He said, "Don't you worry. We're gonna be okay. If they wanted to kill us, they would have already done it. If they were just savages, like everybody is saying," he said out loud, looking towards Sergeant Calloway, "I think we could do some good here." After a little while more of waiting, I looked around and I saw some kids looking in at us. We didn't have a lot of kids in our group, and I was just about the only one about their age. They were teenagers. I walked over towards them and introduced myself, and they of course talked to each other, and they began to tell me all about them. It was at that point I looked back and my parents were standing up and speaking to a couple older gentlemen. They walked into the foyer and they closed it. A few guards stood by and kept us from going inside. At this point I was worried. The kids reassured me that there was nothing wrong. They just wanted to talk to them, see what they were like. I wish I shared their enthusiasm. I mean, I don't know what I would do if I lost my parents. I'm so far away from home. I told them where I was from, and they were just flabbergasted. They couldn't believe that I'd come all this way. But I said it was because of my dad and Trevor and all these good people that we were with. They asked us who the two guys were that were asking them questions earlier. I told them and explained to them, believe it or not, that's Jesse's friends from up north. It's a small world after all, I laughed. "That's weird," they said. "What were their names?" As if they were questioning me. "Well, Trenton and Sam, didn't they introduce themselves?" I asked. "No, they just asked us questions, and they've been running around the church with like chickens with their head cut off, wondering what was going on. They didn't say so much as their name, they just asked us. Of course, they broadsided us, so we really weren't sure if we should trust them or not. To be honest, you really can't trust anybody anymore. I mean, crap, you couldn't even trust anybody before all this, with people going around killing each other and those nut jobs ramming our door and killing some of our guards. I mean, you kind of have to understand where we're coming from." I nodded. I understood completely. I had to ask, how long have you guys been here? I couldn't imagine being in this small town. There must not be very much. Well, luckily one of the kids stood up and said, we've got strong people in the community. We're really close together. We're a tight-knit community, so we got through it pretty quick. And we usually take people in. It's a good policy to have. More people means less trouble. I mean, don't you mean more people, more problems, I asked them. They said no, to the contrary. Which was a surprise. You'd think that you wouldn't want more people, but they made a decent argument for it. What with recruitment, more guards. They made the statement that some people know things, and if you don't know it, it's good to have them around. That made sense, I thought. I sat down and I took a liking to a couple people. They became my good friends at the time, my liaisons, so to speak. Logan, he was a wrestler in high school. He was a pretty tall kid, and he was into sports. I could tell that he was well-liked amongst everybody else, probably pretty well-liked in high school. Jake, he was a bicyclist, and his dad was a prepper. He talked about how his dad taught him how to shoot and how to survive, and I definitely could learn a thing or two from him. And, of course, Dawson. He was seemingly nice. He always carried around a small jug of tea, and he seemed to always have something funny to say. He was one of those good old boys that grew up on the ranch, and it definitely felt like I was very far away from the inner city. These kids definitely grew up in a totally different demographic than I did. But I wasn't one to judge, because these kids might be my very savior, or at least their parents. We waited, sat around, shot the bull, and had a good time, actually, for the first time since, well, before all this happened. A little later, some of the adults from their group brought a couple more of our adults in. We heard some talking, and they took me over to one of the doors that wasn't being guarded. It was locked with chains, but we were able to put our ears up against it and listen in. I could hear my dad's mumbled talking, and I could hear my mother's concern in her voice. I heard Trevor talking, and Sergeant Calloway, and a few others, including Sam and Trenton's families. They were all concerned, and they were all speaking their opinions and their concerns about the battle that apparently happened before we got here. I guess they reassured us that there was nothing wrong. That we were attacked, and we took the fight back to the Marauders. That's plain and simple. I guess that old Western justice, just like in the John Wayne films, really did prevail in this kind of world. After a little while, our parents came out, and we quickly went back to the front of the foyer where we belonged, as to make sure, or at least make it seem like we weren't listening in. The elders, they shook our parents' hands, and they said, you are welcome to stay here if you want. Of course, a few of them were a little leery of it, but they showed us to our homes. We walked down the street, as, of course, gas was in short supply. They took us to a small house. It was pretty crowded. There was already a family living in there, but they said that we had to make do for now. I didn't much mind, to be honest. It was better than sleeping out in the open. Sure was heck better than fighting off zombies with sticks. My parents settled in, and they sent a messenger around 9 o'clock. Apparently that's when they had their third shift dinner. We were all invited, and we were all asked to, change out of our traveling clothes and put on something a little more clean. We ate the best food we've had in weeks. It wasn't canned, it wasn't in a crappy MRE either. It was home-cooked food. Some of them were casseroles that I didn't much care for, but I got to see my new friends, and for once I actually felt right at home. It was kind of nice. They made us feel very welcome, and they offered us hot water, a basin for taking a shower and cleaning up, which was also good because I was starting to smell like a boys' locker room. We had a lot of fun, and the guys even offered to hang out with me. We walked up and down the street, and we noticed that they still had power for a while. I was rather impressed, to be honest. They said they got stuff running, solar panels and whatnot, but they can't leave the lights on too long. It was on a timer, and eventually the street lights did shut off. We just saw a couple of braziers, these little bowls full of whatever they could find, like Crisco or oil, and they lit them up so the streets could have at least some kind of light. We saw men with spears walking around made from sticks and rebar and whatever. They would urge us to head home. We walked towards a small cross-section, and we all said our goodbyes. I was staying with Jake's family, so we made our way to the group home. We walked, and I looked around, and I actually felt safe. To be honest, I told him I was rather impressed. Well, he said, the walls keep them out. That's good. But the sucky part about it is sometimes people figure out how to climb over them or bash through them. Those are the real jerks you have to worry about. You're kidding. How often does this happen? Jake looked around for a minute and said, I'm not really supposed to say, especially not to newbies. But to be honest, I don't think you're going to be going out and telling any marauders or anything like that, but we've had some trouble with biker gangs and just gangs from the inner city. They always come a knocking, asking for something or sending in scouts, and then they disappear. New people disappear. Yeah, they show up with a whole group of people. Sometimes people get shot. I've even seen some people die. It's a bit of a bummer, really. Hey, look, man, I'm not going to say anything to anybody. It's better than nothing. I mean, at one point we were living in tents, and the only thing protecting us was a wall of sharpened sticks. Sure, there are assholes out there, but, I mean, that's just what we have to deal with, right? He nodded. Yeah, sure as heck beats a sharpened stick fence. I thought I had it bad, he laughed. Come on, let's go back. We made our way in, and my mom, of course, was concerned, as always. She looked over and said, Where were you at? I said, Well, I was just hanging out with the guys. Mom, we're fine. She glared at Jake as, of course, we barely knew him. But it was kind of nice to hang out with somebody my age. It was nice to actually be a kid for a few minutes. Of course, my dad was reading a book and told her to calm down, and it was fine. Of course, my mother was right in many respects. They just had a war, excuse me. There's nothing okay. What if he was to get shot? My dad reassured her that I was fine. Of course, I was here in the flesh, so her concern was a little overzealous, to say the least. Eventually, we all settled in for bed. It was a cool night that night. The dew began to come up on the windows. We couldn't exactly turn on the heater or the air conditioning because power was being rationed. I looked out the window and I could see the stars. You don't normally see those in the city. I took a deep yawn. My body began to settle and relax for the first time in months. I was actually in a nice bed. I was clean. I didn't have someone else's blood on me, or dirt, or mud, or God knows what else. I actually got to eat real food that was cooked with good hands and clean people. I didn't have to much worry about having to deal with MREs and unmarked cans of cat food, all kinds of other garbage I wouldn't want to eat. Things were actually kind of looking up, and I was actually hanging out with young people. I was making friends. On my first date ad. One minute we had guns pointing at us, the next minute we're in a home. I think we're pretty fortunate. Anybody in their right mind would agree. I'm really thankful. For once, I think I can allow my head to lay down quickly and not have to worry about some zombie biting at my throat. I think at the end of the day, we're going to be alright. Thank goodness.